Senhoras e senhores, é verdade. Tudo que é bom, chega uma hora que acaba. Mas nós vamos ser brindados agora com uma palestra de conclusão que tende a fazer um norteamento do que na forma prática a gente pode estar pensando em fazer dentro dos nossos ambientes empresariais, ambientes governamentais e até os pessoais. E o que nós vamos ouvir agora é uma coisa que é recorrente, que é a base de tudo que está acontecendo em termos de transformação, ou uma das bases, né? Que é o Cloud Computing. E nós vamos estar brindados pela palestra do Joe Weinman, que já esteve aqui hoje pela manhã num painel, mas brevemente. Eu vou ler o seu currículo novamente, porque vale a pena todos escutarem, e aqueles que não estiveram aqui hoje pela manhã. Joe Weinman is the author of Cloud Economics, or Cloudonomics, The Business Value of Cloud Computing, Wiley 2012, which has been translated into 2 Chinese editions and is the Amazon #1 hot new release in computers and technology, digital disciplines. Attaining market leadership via the cloud, big data, social, mobile, and the Internet of Things, WCIT 2014. He is also a contributor to Regulating the Cloud, MIT Press 2014, and the forthcoming Springer textbook on big data applications. He is in the Cloud Economics editor for IEEE, Cloud Computing Magazine, and has contributed to numerous print and online publications such as Forbes, Information Week, and Wired, plus CIO. A longtime industry executive, he has held leadership positions at AT&T Bell Labs, AT&T Corporate, HP, and Telx, a data center and co-location provider. He has been awarded 22 patents in a variety of technologies, including cloud and distributed computing, mobile telephony, encryption, and voice and data networks. He has a bachelor's in science and a master's in science from Cornell University and University of Wisconsin-Madison, respectively, and has completed executive education at the International Institute for Management Development in Lausanne, Switzerland. Please, the last applause of the event to Joe Weinman. You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I have good news. I need a clicker, by the way. Robert, I need a clicker. So I have good news and bad news. The good news is my presentation only has about 10 words in it. The bad news is it's something like 92 slides. So in the next 2 hours, do I have 2 hours? No, maybe less than that. I'm going to run through just a very high-level view, which hopefully will pique your interest at least. So as Robert said, a few years ago, I wrote a book called Cloudonomics, and I won't go into depth on it, but I want to talk about a shift in perspective. So when I wrote the book, it was primarily a lot of equations and analysis and architecture and analogies regarding cloud computing economics. And I came to a number of conclusions which have since been proven out, such as the optimality of hybrid computing architectures, as well as the ability to innovate new pricing models, such as Google has done with sustained use pricing. It's all good. But in a way, it was a little bit misguided, because to treat the cloud as simply a means for cost optimization or performance optimization or improving the user experience for highly interactive tasks, what I realized as I wrote the book, and I covered this to some extent in Cloudonomics, is that the cloud is fundamentally a transformational strategy enabler that can enable companies not just to reduce their IT costs, which is nice but not earth-shattering, but it can enable them to create differentiated business strategies and create unparalleled customer value, okay? And the logic behind that is simple. In most companies, IT is, on average, something like 4% of revenues. So even if you cut IT by a magnificent 25%, you still wouldn't accomplish very much in terms of the big picture. Whereas if you can enable a company to be more competitive, then you can double, triple, or whatever revenues. Those of you that saw the panel earlier this morning saw reiterated the fact that digital companies now have the most enormous market capitalizations ever seen and are really leading the industry. So that's good, but the real question is, how should we think about IT strategy? So the first observation is that there's a range of value for IT. You can't call it boring, you can't call it incredible, because at one extreme, there are mundane IT systems like conference room reservation systems. Nobody made the cover of Fortune magazine through a better conference room reservation or paperclip ordering system. But at the other extreme, we have things that ultimately are the case where information technology relates to the very existence of firms. So Amazon.com, for example, has had a major impact in a number of retailers. One example would be Borders Books, which was since declared bankruptcy and liquidated. Netflix has had a huge impact on Blockbuster Video, which is essentially fully gone from the face of the earth. Why? Because of superior IT. And one level above that is the use of IT for creating societal impact. So think about things like Smart Nation, think about the Innovation for Jobs talks that we just heard about and so forth. But to say that something is strategic and then to try and figure out how to, in fact, leverage the strategic elements of IT are two different things. And so you can look at all these data points that exist from different companies like Uber or Amazon or Netflix or whatever your favorite innovative company is that is rapidly gained in market capitalization. And you could say, well, that's strategic, but what's the pattern? So after reviewing a number of frameworks that I'd encountered over the years, the one that I really fell back in love with is this one. This is a great must-read book as far as I'm concerned, The Discipline of Market Leaders by Michael Tracy and Fred Viersema. And the reason it's so important is they use very simple everyday examples of how companies can become differentiated in customers' minds and purchasing behavior in three ways. They can either have better processes, which they call operational excellence, better products, which they call product leadership, or better customer relationships, which they call customer intimacy. It's a fantastic book. I swear, it's really well written. It's been translated into many, many languages. But the problem is it was written 20 years ago, before mobile really, was as we know it today, before social media, before the Internet of Things and so forth. So I updated their framework into what I call digital disciplines. So digital technology meets value disciplines, with the idea being that it isn't just a little bit of putting digital or virtual or cyber in front of things. Everything actually changes. So what do I mean by that? Looked at from a customer perspective, there are 4 generic strategies that I've identified. If you have to leave for a plane or whatever, just remember this. The first strategy is information excellence. And the idea there is that if I think about physical operations and I layer in information excellence, I can do a lot of different things. I can optimize processes, I can do long-term process improvement, I can monetize exhaust data. A second major strategy is solution leadership, and the idea there is going from simple products to smart digital products is great, but everything changes when I go to smart digital connected products, okay? Because now I'm connecting to related products or to services that are in the cloud ecosystem, and I'll elaborate upon that a little bit more. The third major theme is the evolution of customer intimacy to collective intimacy. And I call this collective intimacy because the idea is with customer intimacy, there are 2 major factors. One is it's human mediated, and the second is that it's face-to-face. So of course, with the world of cyber physical systems and virtual social networks and things like that, it's easy to make the transition from physical to virtual. But the other key difference is that I'm moving from individual human knowledge to algorithms that develop personalized, contextualized recommendations. And there are some nuances around that as well. For example, rather than having firewalled relationships with individuals, I'm now taking all this data collectively, perhaps trillions of data points, using collaborative filtering and recommendation engines to be able to deliver better insights, recommendations, and services to each individual. And then the fourth thing that I think is really important is accelerated innovation. So thanks to the cloud, I can do things that I couldn't do before in terms of making innovation faster, cheaper, and better. Okay? So if you leave now, better processes, better products and services, better customer relationships, and better innovation thanks to digital technologies. So I'm going to do a quick flyby on a lot of these, and somebody's got to keep me honest on time because I can't really see the timer that well from here. So operational excellence. Think about the old days, Henry Ford and the Model T automobile. It wasn't the first automobile, it wasn't Henry Ford's first automobile, but it was the automobile that changed the world. And the reason was not due to a product change, but due to a process change. Mass production and interchangeable parts drove down the cost, increased the affordability, led to ubiquity. Okay, so that's great, but things change now because if we think about the interaction between information and operations, there are several ways to relate the two. For example, information can be used to optimize physical operations. Information can replace physical. For example, if instead of traveling here, we all did a web conference, then that would be a way of replacing physical operations. I can also monetize exhaust data, fuse the two, and so forth. So let me run through some quick examples. This is UPS Orion, 55,000 routes, each with 120 stops. The number of options for each route is 10 followed by 200 zeros. It's computationally intractable, but the point is that they have heuristics that can optimize labor productivity, reduce fuel consumption, and improve customer service in terms of on-time deliveries. High-frequency trading is another obvious example of using information technology for process optimization, but this time in the virtual world. Port operations is a great example of the use of big data, particularly in terms of it being unstructured, with the idea being that I can take ship manifests, video feeds, ship location, container stacking information, and optimize those operations, again with a similar suite of parameters or metrics like labor productivity, on-time deliveries, minimizing ship waiting time and fuel consumption, and so forth. These kinds of technologies apply even in the craziest types of areas where you wouldn't guess. So for example, vineyards now can deploy Internet of Things irrigation sensors on the grapevines to minimize water consumption while improving the quality and yield of the grapes. So better wine, which at least for me is a critically important objective at lower cost, hopefully. But it's a great example of where high tech can apply in the formerly low tech world. Such optimization techniques can be used to improve customer service. For example, Dubai Airports is looking at matching up flight arrivals and passenger transfers to flight departures to minimize walk time through the airport. So by doing gate assignment, which is sort of an obvious thing to do, but again, here you're leveraging information for optimization. It's pretty obvious that you can mirror the virtual world with the physical world. One easy example is a publication that's both online and in print, but there are some really other interesting examples like General Electric, which has created complex virtual simulation models of their jet engines to be able to do design changes as well as understand performance enhancements due to those design changes. In fact, like grapevines, you can find this kind of fusion in very unusual areas. So Burberry has become a digital leader. They've grown more than 3 times as fast as the luxury goods market as a whole by leveraging digital technologies in many ways. For example, they were the first to do in-tweet purchasing. They've done 3D live streaming of fashion shows. But where it gets really interesting is taking something that you would say is the last bastion of digital value, which is a wool scarf. But by embedding an RFID tag in it, it means that someone can pick it up, put it down on a counter, get all the information like price, manufacturing, design options, etc., or take it into a dressing room where a mirror turns into a digital sign that will play a runway clip. And also, even better, take a look at a customer's prior purchases and say, actually, the scarf that you're looking at clashes with the coat you bought 2 months ago. We recommend this scarf instead. Another good example of fusion of the physical and virtual worlds is Pokemon Go and any type of augmented reality solution. But once I can collect all this data, I can manage and improve processes better. So this is an example of Singtel DataSpark working in cooperation with the Singaporean subway system, the MTR. And the idea is I know when rail passengers enter the subway, and I know where they leave the subway, so I can now determine pairwise source and destination. And then if they have to go far away to a hub and then come back, I can figure out where to build a new railway line. An example that hits very close to home, I don't know if who saw Bill McGee's incredible keynote last night. It was really the most moving and exceptional keynote I've ever seen. But what Operation Smile is doing is really interesting because not only can they manage current processes but improve them. And what they're doing is they're taking before and after pictures. For those of you that don't know Operation Smile, they do free surgeries for hundreds of thousands of kids around the world to repair cleft palate. And so what they're looking at is a before photo and an after photo, and then with that kind of data collection, they can determine which doctors are doing exceptional jobs and take best practices from that and roll that out to other doctors. They can also do long-term process improvements, based on that data collection from the process. Another good example, everyone knows Uber or some of its global variations, but the key thing there is complete process change from the traditional way of getting public or semi-public transportation, right? In the old days, I'm in the New York City area, that's code for New Jersey, and in the New York City area, when you want a taxi, you really only want one when it's raining, and of course that's also the only time that you can't get one. So they took this ridiculous transactional physical process of holding up your hand, hoping that a taxi would see it, stop and pick you up, into process changes all along the way. They maintain customer relationships through a mobile app. They have a matching engine with drivers and passengers. They will project calculated fares. And to me, it's a great example of radical process improvement and industry disruption through, in effect, nothing more than rethinking the process to be digital. Okay, moreover, they have the advantage of an asset-light business model which maximizes return on invested capital because basically they don't need any capital. Drivers have their own cars, and drivers, at least for now, in most places are not employees, and so they require no assets, investment, or fixed costs to be able to drive this incredible exponential scalable revenue growth. Where it gets really cool is monetizing exhaust data. So 23andMe, some of you may know, is theoretically in the business of you send in a swab with your saliva, they do a DNA analysis on it, and for a while they were basically giving you your at-risks for various diseases like Parkinson's. And then what they did is they got a little bit of trouble with the FDA due to insufficient approvals. But in any event, the key thing is that their official business now of DNA analysis based on swabs of saliva and then providing you with your hereditary information, actually in one deal with Genentech, they managed to almost make as much money as they ever did with that selling data. And it's data on Parkinson's for Genentech to develop a drug, so it was a $50 million deal. The fascinating thing about that is not only were they able to monetize data that at least allegedly was not their core business, but this was very ethical. If you're a patient or at risk for Parkinson's, you would like nothing better than for anyone, to come up with a cure for it. So it's a really great example, not just of monetizing these hidden assets, but doing it in a highly ethical way. Chipotle and Foursquare is another example. Some of you may know Foursquare. They allegedly manage check-ins, but in fact, by seeing a decrease in check-ins at Chipotle after Chipotle had several scares like Salmonella and E. coli, they were able to predict sales. Now, I'm not sure what the financial industry thinks about this, but they predicted a 30% sales drop, and sure enough, that's exactly what Chipotle experienced. So think about the ability to trade retail stocks based on this kind of data. It's basically priceless. Another good example is Uber with Starwood, where since Uber knows pickup and drop-off locations, Starwood, if you've registered with them, can basically say, hey, we noticed you're staying at the Hilton down the street. Here's 20% off to try our hotel, which you've never stayed at, and by the way, is better. Another good example is joint optimization like Waze and Rio de Janeiro. And I have some friends from Rio de Janeiro somewhere in the darkness here. But what they did is Waze provides them data on pickup and drop-off, presumably to build or enlarge roads. But in addition, Rio de Janeiro provides them data based on the types of signal sources like traffic cameras that Waze doesn't have access to. So they're both helping each other improve these transportation processes. And ultimately, some of the things around the nature of work in the future get into also the nature of corporate relationships. So Li and Feng in China basically is one of the largest clothing manufacturers in the world. They own 0 factories. Instead, everything is done on a contract basis with an ever-shifting constellation of suppliers and sewing agents to make this apparel. So it really represents what the company of the future could look like, an evolution from a vertically integrated company to a virtual corporation or networked corporation. For example, the way that Apple does design and retailing, but they do manufacturing through Foxconn. So hopefully you get that idea of the different ways in which operations excellence can evolve to information excellence. Second thing I'll talk about is product leadership to solution leadership. So there are great products out there that are not smart, not digital, and not connected. So this is the Rolex Cosmograph Daytona watch. It's a very nice watch. But these days, of course, things are becoming digital, and they're becoming smart, like the Nest Learning Thermostat, which adapts to your behavior. But when I make things not just smart, not just digital, but connected, I now open up really transformational possibilities. So for example, the Apple Watch is an obvious example of taking a mechanical watch and moving it into this age. But these kinds of approaches can be used all over. So this is a water pump located in a remote village, and it's got a smart pump handle. So kids used to walk an hour or 2 hours to get to a pump only to find that it was dry to get water for the family. Now they can know that there's actually water in that well and it's worth going to, or they can go to a different one. It also enables new types of functionality. So I can do remote monitoring and control. For example, I can adjust my thermostat temperature from home. I can extend these kinds of solutions thanks to cloud connectivity. And an example that we all know is downloading apps. And we all think of that in terms of smartphones, but obviously it's only a matter of time before we're able to download new apps into our TV, our refrigerator, our toaster, or what have you. Upgradability is another example. So Tesla, of course, has done over-the-air upgrades in a number of areas, including collision detection functionality, the initial releases of autopilot, and the presumably even better releases of autopilot. The fact that I can modify this code is also helpful. So, for example, Connect, which was originally a closed system, has since been opened up and applied to helping to reduce the severity of autism. I can also have individual product elements in a homogeneous architecture begin to interact with each other. So GE wind turbines went from near bankruptcy after they were acquired by GE into the #1 position in the market, partly because they're smart and they connect through the cloud not only to smart grids to be able to coordinate electricity generation, but they also work with each other. So in effect, one wind turbine can say to its friend right next door, if you move over a few degrees and change the angle of attack, you'll be able to generate 0.7% more electricity. Solutions don't need to be homogeneous, they can be heterogeneous. So this is John Deere Machine Sync, where the grain carts not only have an optimal path thanks to GPS and some software, but they also can interact and coordinate with grain carts. So the grain cart pulls up as the combine has harvested grain, and when it's full, the combine will pause and then keep going after it's replaced with an empty grain cart. Where it gets really interesting, though, is not just a heterogeneous portfolio, but the idea that I can create an entire ecosystem of products that at an infrastructure layer are connected through the cloud, but also have sort of a higher application layer, what I would call a unifying principle. So in Nike's case, they've tied together things like sneakers and pressure sensors to measure things like activities, together with apps running in iPhones and the like, to be able to measure things like GPS location and therefore the rate that you ran at and how far you ran, but then tie those activities to outcomes through things like smart scales that measure weight and also body fat. So what this ties into then is The Experience Economy, another great book by Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore, and what they say is that there's a range of value and profitability as you move up this hierarchy. So consider raw commodities like coffee beans. They might be a few cents a pound. If I turn them into a product, they're now worth a few dollars a pound. If I turn them into a service, like in the US Dunkin' Donuts, then it's maybe tens of dollars per pound. If I turn them into an experience, like a fine restaurant, then they're a few $100s per pound. And the greatest types of experiences are not just one-time ephemeral experiences, but are long-term transformations. Think about things like brain surgery or university education. So what does that mean in terms of cloud-connected products and services? Well, Domino's is a great example. They do a lot in terms of you can configure your pizza online. I've heard they're going to do a 3D version of that. They also have gamified their restaurants to optimize performance. And as a result, if you can see this, the red line is the Dow Jones since the recession, and you can see how Domino's Pizza has gone crazy. And the reason is that they don't consider themselves a pizza company, they consider themselves a tech company. This has very broad implications. Anyone that's ever had a business course has always heard about the distinction between products on the one hand and services on the other hand. So products are tangible and can be inventoried and held onto, and services are intangible and need to be consumed at the point of delivery and things like that. None of that makes any sense anymore because we're in this new world of products and services being together as what are called product service systems, or as I call them, solutions for reasons which will become clear. So what happens? This is the Amazon Kindle Fire, and there's a concierge service built into that product. So is it a product or is it a service? Or conversely, consider the Amazon Dash button. That's a service, namely order fulfillment, that's built into a product, the Amazon Dash button. So the boundaries blur and new capabilities become possible. So we can move from services to experiences. For example, Disney Magic Bands is like a wristband that you wear that has a long-range radio in it, and it can be used for payment and room check-in. But there are lots of other interesting uses. For example, a guest of Disney, let's say a kid that's walking through the park, can now potentially be greeted by a character like Mickey or Minnie, and rather than the character just kind of going like this, they can say, "Hi there, Billy. How are you? How was your trip down from Ohio? Were you able to skip the hurricane, etc.?" And so that's an example of a much more magical experience than the traditional one. Obviously, there are other implications like revenue optimization by deciding where to put the ice cream cart on a hot day. But then the ultimate experience, as I mentioned, is a long-term transformation. And university educations and brain surgery are one example, but another example is what Nike has done through Nike Plus, where the idea is that you can become a better athlete and you can meet your fitness goals in terms of weight and training and so forth. And the way that works, of course, is through that ecosystem that I described. So we're now at the highest possible value and therefore also the highest possible profitability. The other thing is that when I have these connected solutions, which can be products or services, I now have the opportunity to develop a 360-degree view of the customer. So a good example is GE Dose Watch. And what GE has done is when you go to the hospital or you have something that might be wrong, you may get an X-ray, then a CT scan, then go to a private diagnostic facility and get another CT scan or X-ray and so on and so forth. Any one of those by itself is fine and allegedly safe and calibrated, but taken in total, they may not be. So DoseWatch basically interacts with heterogeneous devices from multiple vendors to acquire this comprehensive data to ensure that you're receiving a safe dose. Same thing is true not just in medical, but in financial. Every bank in the world is trying to get a 360-degree view of the customer by combining online, offline views from mortgages and home loans and private equity loans and equities and checking accounts and so forth. The other thing that gets interesting is improve products by collecting data and aggregating it and analyzing it. So one example of this is Netflix, which decided to introduce House of Cards, partly based on intuition, but largely based on data that came from their data points on customer viewing habits, that people like to watch Kevin Spacey and they also like these kinds of political dramas. And that's what led them to beat out all the other people that were looking at potentially funding and provide $100 million in investment to the production company, not knowing anything about them, or at least not needing to know as much as their competition, who said, well, we want to pilot and then we'll run it to a focus group and we'll decide. Netflix beat them to the punch thanks to information technology. Where all this stuff gets really interesting, though, is the types of new business models that are enabled by connected smart digital products. One example is American Family Insurance. They will give you, as a customer of theirs, Nest Protect smoke detectors. Now, you might think, well, all right, if they're giving me something for free, I'm going to end up paying more sooner or later. But that's not the case. They actually reduce your premiums because they've created a win-win. Connected smoke detectors, you can be assured that they're on, and you can get the fire department there more quickly, thus reducing ultimate payouts. Another good example is Solar City, which has invested an immense amount of capital so that customers don't need to. So what Solar City does is they will put solar panels on your house, and then they will let you kind of pay for the electricity that you use. And so it's great for you because you're paying a reduced rate. And it's not one of these, well, maybe in 10 years it'll pay back, right? Like, I put $50,000 in up front for the system, and maybe if I live long enough, I'll actually make a few pennies. The payback is immediate, so it's a great model. And of course, what makes the model feasible is the fact that they can meter usage data in real time and do billing. GE Gen X is another great example of a changed business model. In the old days, basically, as a manufacturer of jet engines, you made them, you sold them, and you walked away. Now, what GE can do is they've got 20 or more sensors on Gen X jet engines. Each one collects 5,000 data points per second. That feeds this enormous repository of data against which analytics is run, and so the predictive analytics helps GE do better predictive maintenance. Predictive maintenance means more availability of the engines. More availability means that they're willing to be paid based on time on wing rather than just a one-time sale. And the opportunities in any dimension, in any industry, are really amazing for these connected products because, think about it, in the old days, if you manufactured a product, you sold it and you delivered it to a customer intermediated by a retailer, you might not ever have any idea who's buying your products. You don't know the demographics. Is it moms buying it for sons? Is it kids? Is it adults? Is it what, age group, et cetera? now you can maintain an ongoing relationship with a customer. And in the case of something like Nike with Nike Fuel, it's a very tight bond because all of my race data and activity data for the last several years is with Nike. I could always switch and buy a different sneaker, but now I've got this relationship with the company. Pay-as-you-drive insurance is yet another example where rather than simply going based on demographics to determine a premium price, what I can do is I can understand minutia in real time about driving behavior. How congested is the road? How accident-prone is it? Am I weaving in and out or doing jackrabbit starts or driving conservatively? In New Jersey, by the way, driving conservatively is not necessarily a key to being safe, because if you drive the speed limit, you're going to be driven off the road. But conceptually, you understand the value of pay-as-you-drive insurance. So you understand, hopefully, process improvement and management and excellence through information, and this evolution, which is not just a matter of saying, we added a feature, which is connectivity. It really transforms business models and customer relationships. The third major area that I'll cover briefly is the evolution of customer intimacy to collective intimacy. And remember, I talked about sort of the personal physician or the butcher or the tailor having this human-mediated face-to-face relationship, which is great as far as it goes, but now we've got algorithms that are doing a lot of this work for us. And this is a little bit tricky, but I wanted to put it up here. I won't go through it in detail, but the point is, and this took forever to make this chart, by the way, if you look here, there are several things that relate to each other. So a better customer experience is not just a matter of business as usual, it's both adding in delight factors and also not having very many issues, right? So if you go to a fast food place and you get a hamburger and fries, you know, that's nice, but not memorable. If, let's say they said, hey, you've also won, a new iPhone, that would be a pretty memorable experience, and you'd like that fast food place. Conversely, if you got food poisoning, that would also be memorable, but you'd never go back there, right? So, but what's interesting is that this whole set of virtuous cycles around customer experience, the infrastructure and culture that enable it, et cetera, another part of it is getting a better understanding of the customer. And that better understanding leads you to a loop of more personalized, more relevant services for that customer. So one example is Amazon.com with upsell, cross-sell, where they can actually grow revenues by recommending relevant or related products to you. Another good example is Netflix. Recommendation is what drives 70% of what Netflix customers watch. So you may say, oh my God, my friend told me about this movie, go into Netflix, search for it and watch it. But mostly, if you've seen Netflix, it's things like because you watch this, there's this, or because you have an interest in, I actually have a deep interest in cartoons about powerful girls because I have an 8-year-old that watches on my account, and that's what she likes to watch, like the Powerpuff Girls. But in any event, the point is that it can generate more relevant recommendations. And what's interesting is in the old days, recommendations or trying to do at least some degree of customer intimacy was based on segmentation, right? You knew demographics. It was men versus women, the 18 to 24-year-old gap, or maybe some zip code information. But now we can learn a lot more about attitudes and values and intent of those customers. For example, in Netflix's case, what do they search on? I can understand behaviors like fast forward, rewind, watching the same movie over and over again. I can understand the context of those behaviors. For example, is on an iPad, a smartphone, the family TV? Is it at my home location or while on vacation? And I can combine all of these together with external data. And the idea there is, for example, with movies, I want to know the date it was made, who the actors are, who the director is. And Netflix actually has metadata taggers that will sit there and watch a movie and say, on a scale from 0 to 10, this movie is an 8.3 in terms of how romantic it is, and a 7.75 in terms of how funny it is. And that all feeds these trillions of data points that in turn give you those recommendations. And in Netflix's case, it isn't so much a upsell opportunity because it's a flat rate, but it's a customer churn reduction and therefore total customer lifetime value opportunity. This same approach finds its way into very unusual areas. So the Mayo Clinic has repositories of genetic data, epigenetic data, microbiomic data, in other words, the bugs that live in your gut and on your skin, and also what's called pharmacological efficacy, in other words, the idea that the same drug may kill you, save your life, need a higher dose for you, a lower dose for you, and just be about average for you and not do anything for you. So they can combine all that. Instead of movie recommendations, it's healthcare recommendations, what are called patient-specific therapies or personalized medicine. Same thing for financial services, where algorithms are now making recommendations for your portfolio. Waze is doing something else. It's a personalized recommendation for you, and it's also frictionless in that you don't have to actually enter any information. You just let the app run. So what all this represents is an evolution from a world in which many of us still live in, which is very short-term, transactionally oriented, into one of relationships, into one of deep intimacy where I've got a partnership with a company, they understand me and can help me do better as a result. Now, smartphones alone are a great example of intimacy, and what I realized, this is probably obvious to all of you, but this took me a little thought, is if you take something like Uber, what is the key difference to start with between Uber and a taxi? The answer is I've ridden in thousands of cabs. Not a single one has any idea about me, my name, where I live, anything about me. Uber instantly has a relationship with me through nothing more than downloading an app. And in fact, there's an insurance company that did nothing more than mobilize their app, and they got I kid you not, a $2 billion instant, not instant, but very close to instant revenue uplift just based on that. So the ability, obviously, to provide accessibility through mobile is key, but even more important, I think, is the ability to now have a relationship with a customer. So the other thing is that these relationships can be not just two-way, right, and interactive, but they can also be contextualized and personalized. And this is an example of Foursquare doing sort of a push recommendation. You know, you're walking by someplace and it says, hey, you're here. Did you know that, you know, conceptually it could be 17 of your friends really love this place, and, you know, you may not remember, but you ate here 2 years ago and thought it was great, and by the way, here's what customers like. Now, that one-dimensional diagram that I showed before, from transactional to relationship to intimacy, actually gets even more complex. There's a great article from the Harvard Business Review about a year or so ago that talks about relational intelligence and the idea that customers want to interact with companies in different ways at different times, and there are all these clever types of relationships that they've identified. So, for example, the one-night stand, even though it's transactional, can be highly profitable. And an example is it's your 30th wedding anniversary, you've never been to Paris, and so you spend a week there, and you're willing, you know, money's no object. Find a champagne because you're only going to do it once in your life. So understanding this is also key to building customer intimacy. The fourth major strategy or digital discipline that I'll cover is accelerated innovation. So in the old days, we had the solitary inventor, and in the nowadays we have new techniques, but you could argue that the three main legs of innovation are these three. I've got to have an inventive idea and reduce it to practice. I've got to have a business model or profit formula and ability to scale that and run it and execute it at scale in my selected markets. And I need to have customers adopt it. And information technologies can help in all three of these major arenas. So I'll cover some of that. So in the old days, we had sort of the solitary inventor, which evolved to shop invention like Edison's Menlo Park lab, to the corporate research labs like GE Research, to then open innovation, where companies are partnering with other companies or academia either to acquire ideas or to acquire distribution channels. But now we have some other techniques that are feasible. And here's one that is occasionally used, which I have to tell you drives me crazy. So Lockheed has the famous Skunk Works, and that I understand, right? Because this is, weapon systems design. You can't just say, hey, anybody out there, we've got an idea for a new weapon, anyone have any suggestions on what we could do to tune it up, right? Because that's deep intellectual property. But the bottom case is a case of a game company that is global, that if you read the fine print, basically says, hey, thanks for all your great suggestions, but we don't want them because we're worried that we'll have too many new innovative products and make too much money. That's basically what the text says. Now, I'm joking a little bit, but obviously they were sued at some time or so because of these ideas. But the point is that being able to get ideas from the broader world is a key to innovation. And so we're entering now this era that I honestly couldn't come up with a better term than this, so I just call it accelerated innovation, but let me explain what I mean. Open innovation is what some companies are looking at, and again, the idea is we have a research lab and we have the best scientists and engineers, and that's great, but as P&G determined, they only had 8,500 of the top research and development personnel within their company as employees. There were 1.5 million outside of the walls of the corporation. And so if they could somehow enlist that talent, that's called open innovation, and it's one of the different variations of open innovation. But the point is, look outside the four walls of your company. But now we're actually entering a new world where you don't even have to pre-select who those partners are, because you can just create things like open contests and challenges, and that really changes the economics of innovation dramatically. So what are some examples? Netflix offered $1 million prize to improve their recommendation engine. I told you earlier about how important that is to them and their success. They have 1,000 engineers working on it, but even so, they actually looked outside the company as well, and there was a 10% algorithm improvement, which is really substantial based on the math involved there in the recommendation engine, using very sophisticated statistical techniques that came from other fields, other companies, and other subject matter experts. Pringles had the idea of printing cartoons and trivia questions on Pringles chips, but they didn't know how to do it. So they leveraged an innovation network that included various people in various countries that were always on the lookout for new inventions, that also then brought that back into P&G, and they were able to find a baker in Italy that had not only figured out how to do it, but had figured out how to build a machine to do it at scale, and so that was the basis for Pringles Prints. GE FlightQuest did it to improve flight arrival times, and then flight prediction times, and then actual flight arrival times. They did it to improve hospital operations and the patient experience through Hospital Quest. Again, these all have prizes with them. This one is a really interesting one. It's folded. For 15 years, the best scientists and researchers in the world could not decode the molecular structure of this particular virus that is related to AIDS. In 3 weeks, somebody that knew nothing about protein folding or molecular dynamics did this via a game online. Okay, so that tells you the power of these open contests where it's open innovation but done on an ad hoc basis and mediated by the cloud. Hackathons are yet another approach, things like 3D prototyping are another approach. Right here in our very own WCIT, the WEDS contest is another great example where it was an open contest, things published on the web around contest rules and application, judging tools that were able to collaborate from around the world to help provide some additional visibility and therefore funding for innovation. And ultimately what we're moving into is a world of machine innovation, and this was maybe the most important event in human history, and I'm not sure if you caught it. This is Game 2, Move 37 of the match between Google's DeepGo AlphaMine program and Lee Sedol, the top Go player in the world. This is an extremely challenging game. It's computationally intractable. In other words, you can't just solve it ahead of time. Even with the world's fastest computers all working together, it would take until the end of the universe to figure out how to play the game optimally. However, in Move 37 of Game 2, the computer made a move. And kind of the people in the audience gasped because it looked like a bad move. It was the type of move that if you were a Go player, you would never do. Saying it was idiotic would be the wrong thing to say. But it was so bizarre that Lee Sedol, the reigning world champion, actually stepped away from the table and vanished for 15 minutes, then came back, regained his composure, and kind of played a response. And nobody could figure out what was going on. It was only 10 moves later or so that they realized that this was a beautiful, innovative move that was not like a human would play, and it's a great example of how we can expect machine innovation beyond what sort of humans would do. There are several things behind that, including some advanced domain-specific algorithms. Also, the machine was learning by playing itself as well as reviewing human games. But it's important because it says that the next generation of innovation will be dependent on machines to help us. And right now, you find this in very unusual areas. Melvin is an algorithm that designs quantum physics experiments, which are notoriously counterintuitive and therefore difficult for humans to design, and it's already made substantial progress in designing new experiments. So I'm not sure how mad people are. Is that you waving at me high or 5 minutes? I can do 5 minutes. You want me to finish in 5 minutes? Is that a stop or a 5?
5.
5, okay, great. So, a few key things. One is gamification. This is the Alveo Breath Trainer. It's a really interesting gamified, cloud-connected product. So what it is kids with asthma can have the severity and frequency of their attacks diminished if they do breathing exercises. But any one of you that has children knows that if you tell a kid, okay, stop playing your game and go do your breathing exercises, you're going to get more breathing exercise than the child will, right? So what this is, it's a breathing controller that you blow into, and it's connected to this game. And the blowfish you see up there kind of swallows other fish. The kid doesn't know that they're doing breathing exercises. They think they're playing a game using this controller with an iPad to play the game. And instead of swiping, they're just breathing. So that's kind of cool. But where it gets really interesting is this stuff is connected through the cloud to both physicians and to parents who can now track progress and create this comprehensive view of exercises, attack severity, frequency, are they doing it enough, and so forth. So it's a really great example of how gamification for a product that is cloud connected can really make a substantial difference. Ford Eco Guide is another example where green leaves grow as you're driving using fewer gallons of gas. And this is one final interesting example of gamification I'll use. It's O-Power. And there was an experiment run at Stanford run by Stanford maybe 15 years ago, or some university in California. And what they did is they were trying to reduce electricity consumption. So they put signs on people's doors that said, do you realize that if you use your fans instead of running the whole house air conditioner, you will save an average of $43 a month? So a rational economic incentive. Nobody paid any attention to that. Then they put signs that said, hey, do you realize that if you use your fan instead of whole house air conditioner, you'll be saving the planet because you'll be helping with energy consumption? Isn't that a noble goal? Nobody paid any attention to that. But what the experiment showed is if they put signs that said, hey, buddy, do you know your neighbor is using a lot less electricity than you? What's up with you? That transformed behavior more than any other approach. So that's called social proof. And what O-Power does is they collect fine-grained utility data or electricity usage data from the utility, and then they also understand the specific messaging approach that customers want. Some want email, some want SMS, some want physical delivery of like an actual physical letter. Some of you may remember what that is. And what they do is they will now tell you, using external data as a reference, for houses built in the same year as yours, therefore to the same insulation standards, that are this much square feet, based on your energy consumption, 74% of your neighbors are doing better than you, okay? And that has driven a massive reduction in electricity use, and the utilities are very motivated to do that around the world because they're under governmental regulations and metrics and objectives around reducing average energy consumption. Other critical success factors include sort of a data culture. So this is, I know there was a panel on this earlier, which you may have seen, but this is an example. The city of Boston has released a lot of data, which in turn unlocks innovation. And so in summary, and I guess I'm more or less on time, the whole point is that if I can combine all of these different products and or service delivery elements like CAT scanners or X-ray machines or refrigerators or appliances or what have you, bring all that data up into the cloud and then do analytics around it and then take action based on that, then I can create differentiated capabilities as a company. And for those of you that are more in government, the same kinds of things apply to governments, right? I can improve, instead of the customer experience, the citizen experience in very similar ways through these 4 methods, which, again, you can use my terminology if you want, or you can just think of leveraging digital for better processes, products and services, relationships, or innovation. Okay, so with that, my time is up. Thank you very much, and we'll bring Robert back.